Might need to adjust my logo at some point. Let me know if you can hear me. This is a test.
Yeah, you're all set.
All right, Jordan.
Okay, let me know if you can hear me.
Yeah, next.
And my name's Mike, and I'm sitting here tonight too.
Oh, I suppose we can.
Suppose you can?
All right, and when I see the counter, I'm going to wait about 10 seconds after the counter, or when he does his countdown. Whenever you're ready for the countdown.
Okay, in 8, 7, 6, 5.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Nashua Community Roundtable. My name is David Lyle. I'm going to be your host for this evening. With me tonight is Michael Atkinson, who's a political commentator here in the city, and Jordan Thompson, who is the new Nashua Young Democrats Communications Director. I want to welcome you both to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, David.
Hey. And as you know, we typically, when we have people who work in politics, we talk politics. So let's get a little bit of a background, Mike. What got you into being a commentator, getting into politics?
I have been a lifelong Democrat, and I read news, and I read the internet, and the internet allows us to add our own voice to the conversation. And from the very early days, I've participated. Never shy about putting my opinions onto web pages. And so that's how I have become known and how you found me on various web pages and why you invited me here today.
Okay, we're starting again.
Okay.
You actually were muted. You never turned the mic. Put it away when you put it in.
I thought you told me that you were busting my chops, were you?
I was at first, but now I'm not.
You're hearing him over Jordan's mic.
Okay, we'll be starting again.
Sorry.
All right.
I'll pay attention this time.
Take 2.
Can you hear me now? I'm the Verizon guy.
Oh, now he's the Sprint guy.
Oh, is he the Sprint guy now?
He went from red to yellow.
Okay. Let me stop recording. Start recording again. 8, 7, 6, 5.
Good evening, and welcome to the Nashua Community Roundtable. My name is David Lyle. I'll be your host for the evening. With me tonight is political commentator Mike Atkinson and Jordan Thompson from the Young Nashua Democrats. He's the new communications director. I want to welcome you both to the show.
Thank you, David.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And as you know, as you may have seen from previous episodes, when we have people in politics on the show, we tend to talk about politics. Mike, let's get a little bit of your background and where you come from and how you got into all this.
Okay, I have been a lifelong Democrat, and I read the news, and I read the internet, and from those places in the internet, we have the ability to add our own voice to the conversation. So I post on a lot of web pages, commentary and thoughts and opinions about what's going on, and that's how you and I came to know each other, is through words typed on computer screens.
All right. And what's a bit of your background? What's your history in education and such?
I have a degree in classical guitar, which means I'm qualified to do not much of anything. And from working in music stores and in sales, I turned towards computers back when the computer age was really getting started. And that's what I do now, is I'm a computer support professional service technician, and I work in a small document management company up in Hooksett, and work with computers all day, every day.
Excellent. And Jordan, let's give a little bit of your background. Where do you come from, and how did you get involved, and what are you going to be doing now?
Of course. So politically speaking, I have been involved for the past 3 or 4 years. My first venture, I began on the Clinton campaign. During the primary season, I joined that campaign in September of 2015. I worked as a fall fellow there, and after Senator Sanders won the primary, I started working, I think, a little bit afterwards. There was like kind of a dry spell within the campaign. So after we won the nomination, I started working as a volunteer for the coordinated campaign here in Nashua. After that loss, I started working for the National Foster Youth Institute. And that organization focuses on lobbying efforts in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., lobbying members of Congress to transform the child welfare system. I'm a former foster youth, so that was something that really mattered a lot to me. So after I left the foster care system, I wanted to immerse myself in that kind of activism. Since then, I've deeply immersed myself in my work with other social, racial, and economic justice organizations. And that's how I landed with Greater Nashua Young Democrats.
Excellent. Now, I don't know if you got a chance to watch State of the Union last night. Do either of you have an opinion on what you saw, or maybe some of the feedback that you may have gotten from the post, for lack of better terms, the post-speech coverage?
I'll go first. It was a very disturbing speech. I didn't think I would be able to get through it, but I did. And I almost wish I hadn't watched it. But it was very disturbing. There were many parts where the president, very blatantly exploited the families of, isolated incidents of immigrant violence and paraded them in front of the television cameras as almost like his token. And it was very deeply disturbing. And there were definitely certain parts of the address where he just blatantly lied, and that was to be expected. But nonetheless, it was very frustrating to watch. I also watched the Democratic response from Congressman Kennedy, and that was, of course, you could see the comparison. You could see the lack of comparison, rather. There was a very distinct difference in the way that they both spoke, messaging, and the fact that Democrats are there because we care about people, and we care about the State of the Union. And it was clear that President Trump has a different agenda. In addition to that, I think the media coverage was very disappointing. You saw the cover of the Washington Post. Their front page, I think their headline was "A Call for Bipartisanship." And we had always expected this kind of normalization of Trump's xenophobia, his bigotry, the things that he spews on a daily basis. But nevertheless, it's continuously frustrating to watch the media, the mainstream media rather, normalize that kind of behavior. We shouldn't praise him just because he got in front of a teleprompter for 90 minutes and spoke and read words. He has to do more than that to prove himself, and he has yet to do that within the year that he's been president of the United States.
Mike, do you have anything else you'd want to add? Or
I don't tend to watch speeches, and I did not watch last night. Once the speech is released in printed format, I go in and I read it. And that allows me to take it in without the vocal tics of the person giving the speech. It also allows me to avoid any commentary from the news people. The way the camera pans around the gallery sometimes is bothersome to me. What I read of the speech was a bit disheartening at the beginning, in that he mentioned so many times individuals, that this person had this thing happen or did this, and because of that we should build a policy. Seems to me that policy based around an individual is not the way to better the nation. We have to think about what's the right thing to do for everybody, not what's the right thing to do for this specific situation.
so not segregating specific classes or groups or individual people?
Individuals. We often see it here in New Hampshire. We have a constitutional amendment that is being proposed that's floating around. I think it's called Marcy's Law. That's getting a lot of news now. And the young woman Marcy, many years ago in California, had something bad happen. And because of that, laws have been written. I think a law written directed at the actions towards one person are inherently bad. I don't think that's the way we should make laws. And I thought that the president did that throughout the speech. He said, here's this person, this is what they did, and here's what we're going to do from that. And I don't think that is a reasoned way to govern. So no, I did not see it, and I didn't see the commentary, but I do read it and see what's happening. The opinions get fed back through the internet and what I see there.
All right. We're going to come back down to the Nashua level. Jordan, you're involved with the Young Nashua Democrats. Where do you believe the city is going? Do you think it's going in a positive direction? Do you think it's something that there's work to be done? Or if so, where do you think that work needs to be done?
Great question. I think the city is going in a very progressive way. What you saw with the election of these three aldermanic candidates that Young Dems, really worked very hard to elect: Brandon Laws, Shoshana Kelly, and Dave Tenza. And that was a really incredible feat that Young Dems did not do alone. We did with the help of the Democratic City Committee. But together, we achieved that goal. And I think that's just evidence that Nashua voters value progressive ideals, and they value people who are going to push for those ideals and put them before corporate interest or anything else of that matter.
Okay. And to those of you who are viewing on YouTube, if you want to go into the live chat, if you have any questions for any of my guests, please post it into the live chat. We are monitoring that throughout the show. And where are we as a city? We're coming into the midterm elections at the state and the federal level, but then next year we've got another mayoral election. So we seem to have every second Tuesday in November seems to always be an election day. Is that something that we maybe want to take and have it blocked off as a city holiday, so to speak, since it's a predictable day, or is it or how do we go about getting more residents engaged and get them out to the vote? I mean, we want to see record-breaking polling, but we're expected during the special election coming up, I think it's only anywhere between 8 and 15% turnout. How do we get that 8 to 15% up to, say, 25 to 30% or even 50%?
Well, I think that's a bigger question than just Nashua alone. There's no reason that we're holding elections on the Tuesday following the first Monday in November. That is a vestigial hang-on from the very earliest days of the Republic, and it's silly. We should either get into the postal age and allow us to vote by ballot, by mail, or we should have a national holiday that allows everybody off to be able to get to their local polling place. There's no reason that we don't do that. It should happen. It won't, because we are a culture of traditions, and changing traditions is difficult. But that's what I think we should do.
Jordan?
I absolutely agree 100%. I think there are so many resources that we can lay out to engage members of the community. But in addition to that, there are little things like establishing online voter registration. That is huge. I think a huge step towards enfranchisement was being able to go to the polls on election day and register to vote. But the only other opportunity that you have to do that is to go to City Hall and do it, which is what I did. But not everyone has the ability to do that. So I think it's really important that we introduce online voter registration. But working with Greater Nashua Young Dems, and this was something that I really wanted to touch upon, is just looking for incentives to bring more people into the process. I always say that there are so many people who are politically minded and they just don't know it yet. And I think part of my work with Greater Nashua Young Democrats is looking for more ways to bring more people in. whether that be, providing incentives for people to show up to our meetings, providing transportation to the polls, which is already done in a great capacity. There's a lot of work that we can do to make sure that everyone is included and feels represented in our democracy.
We have, countering that, though, is an entire structure that is talking about voter fraud, and that voters are voting illegally, and that it jeopardizes the integrity of the vote. And that's a significant problem that individual municipalities trying to address greater turnout, doing Nashua establishing an online voter registration, if that was possible for the city to do it on its own, it creates targets for the attacks against voter registration. I believe that there is a concerted effort to keep certain people from the polls. I don't think it's an accident that voter ID laws do what they do. They are designed and intended to suppress the vote. And I don't think that state by state we can address that successfully. I think it has to be addressed at a national level. I'm tired of attacking or defending against the attacks from here, there, and everywhere.
So what solutions do you think then might be used to provide a safe and secure method of online voter registration? Could it require the registrant utilizing their social security number or another means such as their driver's license to identify who they are, and then the system would then cross-check, for lack of better terms, with, say, the DMV or to verify that that person is a U.S. citizen or not? Or what solutions might be available so that those of us who are up in the legislature know how to craft a bill that would enfranchise the vote? We'd get more people to register and actively go to the polls.
I think a national registry is required. I think we have to have a national voter registration, and it should be run by the federal government. I don't think we should have the state by state, where we have 50 states and the different territories, all with different regulations as to who qualifies to vote. One of the very large things that's going on right now is that felons, having served their time in prison, having been released from prison, and are now good upstanding citizens again, in many states don't have the right to vote.
I believe they got a court case going on in that down in Florida, where so that they can get their right to vote back. To basically, I believe there's a constitutional amendment that says after they serve their term, all rights and privileges are restored.
Why can't those in prison vote?
And again, that leads to that leads to overturning a state law probably that Florida has. But I'm not too familiar with the laws of felons coming back into the society up here in New Hampshire. I know we've got the Safe Stations program, we've got the drug court, but what solutions do we have here at in New Hampshire to help get more people who are legally allowed to vote and get them out there?
Why are there citizens who are not legally allowed to vote? What's the rationale for that?
Exactly.
If you are a citizen, why can't you go to the polling place and have a voice in how the country is run, or how the state is run, or how the city is run? Isn't that a critical thing? Part of being a citizen is to participate. But if we say to some citizens, you are not allowed to participate, what does that say about how we want to be governed? It's I believe, a very big problem. And we say many times that you cannot vote if you don't have this identification in your wallet. If you don't have a driver's license or you don't have a car, you can't vote. If you don't have a birth certificate, you can't vote. If you don't have a National Rifle Association ID, you can't vote. An NRA membership card, I believe, is legal identification in Texas. It's ridiculous. Every citizen should have the right to vote in every election, whether they're incarcerated for a criminal offense or not.
Well, what affects one citizen affects the other. It's a bit of social responsibility over personal responsibility matter when it comes to voting. Everybody has a responsibility to vote, but they don't necessarily see it. We're gonna move a little bit. I don't know if you've read the news earlier. There was a bit of a rail accident down in Virginia with an Amtrak train hitting a sanitation truck. I'm not sure if you got any thoughts and opinions on that.
It is unfortunate. I understand a gentleman in the truck lost his life. I understand the people on the train were the Republican family members and staff committee members from the Republicans' House caucus going to a meeting in West Virginia, so very bad in that regard. That they were taking Amtrak, hooray. They were on a train. They were using public transportation. Great. I believe that the crossing where the truck was did have lights, did have crossing signs, so why was the truck on the rail? That will come out. But it appears that it was the fault of the truck driver rather than the train.
Okay. Well, speaking of rail, we recently got news that the governor has switched his course to be for bringing commuter rail to New Hampshire. Jordan, do you have any thoughts and opinions on what advantage that commuter rail is going to have for New Hampshire?
So, to almost counter your question a little bit, last cycle I ran for moderator in my ward, and unfortunately I lost. But I did, take the opportunity to speak to a lot of voters outside of the polls. And one woman I spoke to was a registered independent, and she said, we spoke about the possibility of rail coming to New Hampshire. And she spoke about her concern of Nashua losing what she called cultural identity if rail was introduced. She made the claim that she didn't want Nashua to become another Manchester or another Boston. And she felt like Nashua was kind of its own little space that she felt would be almost threatened by rail coming to New Hampshire. And of course I disagree because I think rail coming to New Hampshire would bring a ton of money and revenue to our economy. It would bring a ton of people to our state. And I mean, I know personally from my age demographic, I know a ton of people who would love to go down to Boston for the day and be able to come back up. I know a ton of people who, live in New Hampshire, but they might work in Boston. And instead of, driving down, they would love to take the train down for work. And I understand some of the Republican-led dissent in terms of, not wanting people to leave the state. But like I said before, it brings a ton of people here. I don't know if you will ever go to the Merrimack outlets on a Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon. You'll see busloads and busloads of people coming up from Massachusetts, coming down from Maine, coming down from Canada even, to take advantage of the low prices and our lack of tax. And I think that would be really important for us to capitalize on. So I am absolutely in favor of rail coming to New Hampshire, and it's unfortunate that our governor is such a kind of flip-flop on that issue, because it would really improve the lives of a lot of New Hampshire residents. But I'm at least happy that he's finally seen the light.
Yeah, I've noticed that it's one thing. It could create a boom or additional revenues coming into the state.
Absolutely. It brings it brings new businesses as well. It brings people to those new businesses, and I think it would overall be very good for both our identity as Nashua, New Hampshire, and our economy. So.
Your thoughts on the rail?
It should be done. It should have been done years ago. The Executive Council, I understand, squashed the spending of federal money to research it and have for years. So the governor changing his position now, and I believe his justification for changing position was, well, now it's time. And no, leaders lead. They don't wait until Amazon wants to come to town to say, oh, we'll fix it for you, Amazon. It was ridiculous. I was early this year, or early last year, there was some money that was going to be spent to put in a parking lot over by the bridge into Hudson.
The Crown Hill?
Correct.
And I believe that park and ride has already been finished. They just...
And it was, and when they said that was going to go forward, I thought it was an incredibly ridiculous thing to do. The legislature had shot down rail. We weren't going to get it. Why were we going to turn soil into pavement for a park and ride? And after some time passed, Jim Donchess mentioned, the mayor mentioned that he was working with a private organization to be private rail. So I'm sure that he had that in the works, but didn't make it public. So that park and ride that has been built,
doubling as a rail station,
is now there for the rail station. And so it was not, as I thought originally, a foolish use of federal money. Give the money back to where it belongs if we're not going to use it to do the right thing. But if we get a rail station there, good deal.
All right. We've spoken about the about voting, and we've spoken about rail. What are the thoughts on some of the stuff? We got a voucher bill coming through finance right now up in Concord. When dealing with schools, to try and pull some money out of the public education and give it to private schools. Where do you think the legislators should go, and how do you think we can get that message out to get the other legislators to see what damage it's going to do?
That's such a difficult challenge. I am the product of public education. My father was a public school teacher for 40 years. I think public education is one of the founding bedrocks of the nation. It is so critically important. I believe there is an orchestrated campaign to kill public education. There are many people who want it to go away. They're using a lot of different ways to accomplish that. Between the homeschooling and the charter school programs. And those are all presented as attempts to improve education, where I think the net result is to destroy it. How do we change that? I'm not certain, except for having people stand up for public education and to stop taking money away from public education to give it to private organizations and to private individuals.
All right. And Jordan, do you have any thoughts on the matter, or
I
do you say
absolutely
everything
agree.
you
I
said?
mean, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay. All right. Now, we've got the soup kitchen coming up in a couple weeks. It's going to be flicking the switch. The mayor's going to be flicking the switch, make it have it go on solar energy, thanks to Revision Energy. Are there other projects or other places in the city that could take advantage of the abundant solar energy that we seem to have most of the year in this state? Do you think that here in the city, where can we bring solar energy, or where would be prime spots to put a solar farm even?
The city owns the property at the end of Burke Street, if I'm not mistaken. The old, there was a factory down there. Right now they're using it to park school buses. And I think they could certainly capitalize on that geography. They were going to put the public works down at the end of at that building until they found out the renovation costs on it was going to be too high. But they own that property, and they could certainly put a solar farm there. One of the challenges with solar is the net metering agreement with the state. We recently increased the cap for solar net metering from 1 gigawatt to, I think, 2. I think we doubled it. Where the electric companies have to purchase the net metered solar. There is still in solar a challenge with having the grid, having the electric grid. And until the electric companies make it part of their mission to drive themselves out of business, we're going to have a problem. You know, we should have solar panels on every roof and batteries in every basement. And let's eliminate the grid completely so that where power is generated and stored where it is used. And then we don't need an electric grid for private consumers.
So it'll basically be just for the public use, such as street lamps and public buildings.
And again, that could be handled municipality by municipality with a solar farm to generate the lights, you know, and to handle whatever power that's needs. It certainly is possible. And it's just a matter of whether we are going to make the investments and have the will to do it.
Jordan, do you have any thoughts on solar energy or new renewable energies?
This is a topic that I'm not very familiar with, but I, of course, am pro any kind of environmentally friendly policy. So this is something I would definitely, you know, like to research a little bit more on. Sounds very interesting.
I visited Europe last year, 2 years ago, and on the top of every house was solar panels and storage containers. You know, I don't know how they worked, but they were plentiful. And we're starting to get to the point with rooftop solar panels with the private companies coming around, and they'll put them on your roof for free, but they own them, and they're getting the power back from them. And that's, I suppose, a good American business model to do it.
So leasing the panels effectively.
Exactly. And you have a reduced electric bill, but they get all the benefit. They get the you know, once those panels are paid for, you know, that's revenue for them and not for the consumer whose roof it is on. And I think they still have some challenges with, okay, you have solar panels that you've leased on your roof and now you want to sell your house. It becomes another layer of complexity to complete a home transfer. I know that they've been working on that. I'm not sure what the status is of it now. And Jordan, I'm not an expert on most of this stuff either.
I mean, you could have fooled me. You sound very, you know, well spoken on this issue, so on many issues. But I have to take a few notes.
All right. Now, Jordan, the other night you had mentioned to me you're a member of the LGBTQ community. What do you think the city and or the state can do to address equity in that community to try and make it so it's a more fair system?
I think the most obvious answer right now is the trans bill. And I think, you know, promoting that would be very beneficial. Something that really bothered me is the discussion on conversion therapy and the fact that it's still legal in New Hampshire. And that needs to change. No one should ever, you know, feel as though that they, you know, can't be who they are. And any kind of program that is dedicated to, you know, trying to implement psychological or emotional torture, because that's really what it is, should never be promoted. So I definitely believe in the illegalization of that particular practice.
Well, that, as I understand that, there is no place in New Hampshire where it is practiced. So certainly it should not, I don't disagree with the idea of not allowing it, but it's also apparently not a concern right now in New Hampshire. There is nobody practicing conversion therapy. There are certainly things as far as making sure that people are treated equally that are critical and we always must be vigilant about. But I think the bigger thing is just, you know, the old maxim, mind your own business. You know, who cares what somebody else does? It's none of your business. Mind it, you know, keep your nose to your own knitting. Certainly where there are abuses based on some reason, then certainly we should as a society protect against those abuses. But I think if more Americans could just mind their own business, we'd be better off.
I agree with that sentiment, but unfortunately, we live in a country where one particular major party is, you know, really dead set on kind of forcing their traditional values on the rest of the country. So as much as I'd like to say, like, the easy, simple solution is just mind your own business, it's not really the reality that we live in. I mean, barely a few years ago, people like me couldn't even get married. You know, I think there's so much more that goes into it than just that kind of simple idea. You know what I mean?
Well, that's why I had mentioned the word equity, because
Right.
we know that in our in the system we can have equality, but equity seems to be a little bit more on the a little bit more of a fair share.
Definitely.
Uh,
No one is asking for special treatment. That's an argument that gets played out a lot, particularly what you saw with the very oppressive trans bill that was infamously from North Carolina. And I think members of this administration have made comments. This presidential administration have made comments, alluding to us wanting, members of the LGBTQ+ community just wanting special treatment. We just want protection under the law, just like any other, law-abiding citizen. And it's not a matter of political correctness. It's not a matter of wanting, special treatment. It's a matter of, protecting the citizens that live in this country, regardless of, sex or, race or gender identity or sexual orientation.
And again, I think sexual orientation and gender identity certainly could be added to the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, 1965, whatever.
1964.
Right? I mean, there's no reason for it not to be there, although it was, the people were so closeted in 1964 that, it wasn't as an obvious thing. We're in a different time today, and to add those protections to that legislation, I think would be fair.
We'd have to flip
and
the Congress.
Very true.
I wonder. I seem to recall that one of our prior vice presidents had a homosexual daughter. There's enough Republicans who know gay people too, that it.
That was been Vice President Cheney.
Yes, it was. That's who I was alluding to. Very good.
Well, as we move over into like more of a national scale, we did talk some about Nashua and some about New Hampshire, and we've alluded into to the national stage. How would you say, if you were to give like a report card on the way our representatives in the House and the Senate have been working, how would you say they've done? Is there any areas where you think they could put more energy into, or what areas are they doing well in?
So for all of our representatives in the House and the Senate, I think they're doing overall a very good job. If I were to give a grade, I would probably say, I think I would give a B. I have had particular instances where I've disagreed with the way that one or two of our representatives have gone about or approached a certain topic or issue. Most recently, I think the push for DACA and dreamers in this country, and I think Senator Hassan and Jean Shaheen as well, being kind of put on this quote-unquote deportation caucus, voting in favor of keeping the government open for that short period of time. And then I think there was a similar thing that happened just last week with the government shutdown. There have been kind of particular incidences where I feel as though they could be a little bit stronger in their support of DACA recipients and the dreamers. But overall, I think Congresswoman Custer and the all-female delegation that we've sent to Washington has just done a very good job of upholding the progressive values that New Hampshire voters have clearly, said very blatantly that we want, and then, advocating for the issues that we hold dear. So overall, I would give them a B. Do you disagree?
It's a challenge because as members of the minority in both houses, they're really very limited in what they can do. The senators, I think was a good choice to sign whatever it was to open the government. Democrats don't shut down the government. Thank you very much. You know, let's govern. Let's not govern, right? But I think that they are in a very weak position, and so regardless of the positions they take, there's not a whole lot they can do. And one of the things that bothers me greatly at the federal level and at the local levels is the discussions about bipartisanship. I don't want bipartisanship for bipartisanship's sake. I want negotiations and give and take. I want the people in the room to be arguing from the extreme points of view. Sit me down, or sit Senator Sanders down with Senator Cruz, and let them have the discussion and figure out where it's going to be, but meet somewhere. And for the past some number of years, we've had one of the groups in the room sitting there and stomping their feet and holding their breath and not doing the actions of governance. And that's the problem. Argue from the extremes, but realize that you have to give a little bit and take a little bit and meet somewhere and run the country or run the community and make that happen. I think that's very important.
Maybe we should have some more debates outside of the election campaign season where we bring in Senator Sanders or Senator Cruz and have them actually on a debate stage even talking about the issues that they're going through.
Yeah, I think a lot of times, you know, we hear about, oh, it's got to be bipartisan, it's got to be bipartisan. It will be. It will be. You know, most of America lives in the mushy middle, you know. I tend to be pretty far outside the mainstream, and I know it. I know that most people don't think like me. Most people don't think in this country that every citizen should have the right to vote, even if they're sitting in a prison for having committed a heinous crime. I think they're a citizen, they should have the right to vote. That's where we should be having that discussion from, okay? And I'll yield. Being a leader means that you yield on some of those things, but the other side needs to yield too. And I think we can look back over a number of examples where that doesn't happen. And I think we see that at the state level, we see it at the federal level, I think we see it at the local level. Where we have, I'm thinking the school board, we had a kind of an issue of that was making the rounds recently.
That was during the last mayoral there was that massive write-in campaign because they had tried to privatize the custodians.
Mm-hmm. So as far as where our federal delegation is, they're doing what they can. I think they tend to be a little bit more in the mushy middle, and I think that's kind of where New Hampshire is. You know, we think we're many of us think that it's a red state, not the progressive state that you and I live in this little community. Right. But when you get up above the notches, you see a whole different mindset.
So it's sort of a center state over a left state or a right state.
We're a swing state.
All right. And looking at what we have going on with the with Mueller's investigation, have you guys had any thoughts or looked at what's going on with that? And do you think, what advice, if you were to be able to sit down with the president and his counsel and say, this is what I think you should be doing, do you think they should be doing? What advice would you give the president and his counsel or his aides in this manner?
Well, I think at first it was very difficult because at the start of this investigation, I think a lot of Americans were scratching their heads and thinking, you know, what is taking so long? You know, this is a man who many believe was not legitimately put into office. It's been very clear since the beginning. For a lot of people, this is something that, you know, Secretary Clinton was really echoing during the campaign, that, you know, a foreign adversary was actively trying to put this man into power, and they succeeded in doing so. And I think it was very difficult for people, even like me, to kind of sit back and look at the fact that, you know, our representatives have a hard task at hand because the impeachment process is a very difficult one, and it's only been done a handful of times, if that. So it's not something that you can really just flip a switch and say, okay, this president is out of office because you know, have voiced some dissent on Facebook. You know what I mean? So I think that has been something a little bit difficult for me to kind of even process, but after meeting with some of our representatives and understand, trying to understand the issues that kind of lie in their pathway, I've come to realize that this process is going to be a lot longer than people think it's going to be, as with any impeachment process is. And I think proving Russia's involvement with hard evidence is going to be difficult, but I think it can be done. Someone must have left a breadcrumb trail somewhere. As for any advice I would give to the president and any members of his administration, I would just say resign. I don't know how good that would be for, in the practical sense for the state of our union, but this is a man who has demonized and isolated so many Americans with his divisive, racist, blatantly white supremacist-fueled behavior and rhetoric. This is a man who, was put into office by a foreign adversary. This is a man whose campaign actively colluded with this foreign adversary to put him into office. This is a man who, blatantly employed, neo-Nazis and enabled them in his White House administration. This is a man who thinks that neo-Nazis that murdered a woman in Charlottesville, Virginia are very fine people. This is a man who, and I'm not sure I can swear on this, so I won't, but this is a man who refers to, African countries as, S-hole countries. This is a man who has disgraced what it means to be president of the United States and to hold the position of the man or woman who sits in that chair at the Oval Office. He has disgraced everything, and everyone who works under him is enabling him. Everyone in that White House, from Ivanka to Jared to, Mike Pence himself to Paul Ryan, everyone, regardless of party affiliation, that, is actively supporting this agenda, that is, throwing their reputation behind it, is enabling him. And I think what it's going to take to bring America back from kind of the catastrophe that is his administration, is his resignation. I don't think an impeachment process, I think there's already so much chatter on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to impeachment. On the right, I feel they'll never accept impeachment. They'll always have this conspiracy theorist kind of mindset. The Democrats were always, out to get him. They were always out to get this administration. And people on the far right are not going to accept impeachment. So my advice to him is to resign.
So get out now.
Get out. And that doesn't seem very practical. And I try to pride myself as a pragmatic person, but we are at such a state of disarray that our country has likely not seen since 1860, 1861. I just don't see any other solution. This is, and I think the thing that bothers me the most is that Republicans are so blinded by partisanship that they can't see, the 2 feet that's in front of them. I think if the tides are switched, and I don't like to, jump into whataboutism, but if the tides were switched, Republicans would be calling for the impeachment of, Hillary Clinton or any other Democrat that, potentially would have colluded with a foreign government to be elected. That is quite literally treason. And if it were any other administration, the rules would be different. But you've seen the normalization of an almost dictatorship with this administration from the Republican Party, and it's unacceptable, and it has to stop. And Republicans have to, I don't agree with, there's very little that we do agree on, but when you see Republicans that are stepping up to the plate like Jeff Flake, like John McCain, who may not be voting for the country's best interest, but they'll love to be performative in front of the cameras and say this is wrong, Trump should not be doing this. While I wish that they would vote the same way that they speak, it's very important that they do say those things, and they do get in front of the national audience and say that, look, just because we're Republicans doesn't mean that we're going to allow this to happen. And there needs to be, I know we talked about the bipartisanship, but I think there has to be that sense of unity. And this is what happened in the 2016 election cycle. This is how it's still affecting us. Russia is not going to stop. Our foreign adversaries are not going to stop with 2016. they're going to threaten our midterms. They're going to threaten our 2020 presidential election. They're going to threaten 2022 and 2024 if we don't put a stop to it now. And I think it's very important that we have people on both sides of the spectrum, standing up and saying that loudly and proudly.
He was right when he said resign. I mean, that would be the counsel that I would give, although I'm certain he's not going to come to me. The fact is, and I'm so tired of hearing it, there was conspiracy. The term that gets thrown around is collusion. Russians met with Trump in Trump Tower. People on the campaign met with the foreign minister from Russia. Okay, they did meet. They did have meetings. What is available now in the public record shows that it occurred. Our legislatures at the federal level in the Republican Party will turn when it starts to affect them. 34 sitting Republicans are not running for re-election. Okay? Today it was Trey Gowdy who made the announcement, the senator from South Carolina. He's in a solid red district. All he has to do is say, I'm in, and he would be then continue his job. So a number of Republicans are abandoning their position, and some will lose their position without abandoning it. And when they start to realize that's the ground in front of them, they will turn and on the executive. That happened with Nixon, who was reelected in 1972. And then when the Judiciary Committee in 1974 says, yeah, we can't go into the next election with you, it was August 1974 that Mr. Nixon resigned because his Republican Congress said, yeah, we're not doing this. And we'll get there.
So, I mean, right now, most of Congress are gearing up for their next re-election campaign. You've got most of the House and two-thirds of the Senate.
And the pressure is going to get stronger. A number of them are leaving to not face election. The thing that's puzzling to me is that, if they removed Donald Trump, they would have Mike Pence. And Mike Pence is no friend to the center or the left of this country. Okay, he is.
Right now, though, he could be considered part of. He could be considered a liability given his complacency with working with the president.
And I would hope so. I think that's the kind of idea, because I certainly will never be an advocate for a Mike Pence presidency. I mean, he is anti-gay, he is anti-female reproductive rights, he is anti-literally everything that I stand for. He's a revolting human being. But I think, hopefully, with this investigation, as Robert Mueller continues to find everything that he needs to find, Pence will be implicated, and I do think that other members of the administration will be implicated as well.
I think that there's a phrase that you hear on police television shows about fruit from the poison tree. I think this entire executive branch is touched by the interference from Russia and the conspiracy with Russia. And I think that even goes to Neil Gorsuch. Mm-hmm. I think he should be removed and impeached from the Supreme Court.
That's a stolen seat.
Well, not only that, but we also Nunes as well is having is apparently showing that he's more of a representative of the Trump administration than of his own district.
With the memo that is bogus and has no factual basis that they're trying to release. Absolutely.
That's theater, though.
Yeah.
The theater that we see on the Sunday morning talk shows and on talk radio, that's theater and entertainment. Some people take that for news. It's not. We don't pretend it is in my world. And the theater can play out. But the damage that can be done by having people in positions of power through the actions of Russia, I think that we as Americans should take serious consideration of.
Absolutely.
Again, I don't pretend that I'm in the mainstream. My call to impeach and remove Neil Gorsuch from the Supreme Court probably isn't going to get very far. But the fact that he was, the appointment was not given to the President Obama's nominee,
Right.
and that they waited until they had Mr. Gorsuch to put through, I think that he is.
Not only that, but they adjusted the filibuster couldn't be used.
That's the rules of the Senate, though. And in the Constitution, it says the Senate can make its own rules. I don't care that there's a filibuster or not a filibuster. They can make those rules, and I'm fine with that. Changing it midstream, you can gripe a little bit about it, but that's kind of what they can make their own rules means. But I think that he is absolutely fruit from the poison tree and should be removed. And all of the lower court appointments need to be viewed just as suspiciously. I do think that if we get to criminal situations, that the vice president is in jeopardy. You
I
know,
believe most of the line of succession might be in jeopardy.
Absolutely.
no, because Paul Ryan is the next in line, and I think that, you know, although he's, you know, not the sharpest tool in the shed, I'm pretty good with President Ryan.
All right, well, we're just about out of time. Is there any messages you might have for our viewers?
Please erase that part where I said I'm pretty good with President Ryan. Don't ever let that get out.
But is there any other messages you might have for the viewers when it comes to generally politics or even living in the city?
The challenge to be aware is always a big deal. There's so much information that's coming towards us, and we do tend to live in our own little sound bubbles. You know, I read what the people on the other side of the political spectrum call the liberal media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR. I rant and rail at them as often because they're way too far to the right. But to be aware of what's going on is, I think, the big challenge. And to know that politics affects you every day in countless ways. And you can't be aware of that unless you're aware. So.
Absolutely, I agree. You have to stay aware. You have to stay involved. You have to be engaged in your community. You know, whether it's showing up to one, you know, Greater Nashua Young Dems meeting, or, you know, just showing up to the polls. It's very, very important to be engaged in your democracy, because it only works when we're, you know, all engaged. That's really all that I have to say.
Okay. Well, as my final message, don't forget those who are living in Nashua, we do have the special election on March 20th. Be on a lookout for who the candidates are. Learn about the candidates. Find out who you can support the best or the most. Get engaged, and if you're not registered to vote, go to the city clerk's office and get yourself registered to vote before the cutoff. But if you do miss the cutoff, you can always register at the polls. I do want to thank everybody for viewing us tonight. Mike, I want to thank you for being on the show. Jordan, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope we'll have you guys back on the show at some point in the future. And I do want to say thank you and good night.